This is an acrylic painting tutorial using architecture as an inspiration for an abstract painting. To start, you're going to create a background, and when I do this in the classroom, I limit my students to 3 colors, and we use a scrap of cardboard as a makeshift paint scraper. The good thing about using that is you can throw it away when you're done. Select 3 colors or more. I just always think a limited palette to start with is just a safe way to go that you think captures the place that you were inspired by. My painting is going to be inspired by my trip to Seattle, so I'm thinking about the beautiful misty sky, I'm thinking about the ocean, I'm thinking about the sound, all of those like beautiful natural elements. Now, this video is not going to be step by step so your painting looks just like mine. I'm going to talk about how to think about making a painting, what steps you can take, but your painting is going to be very different from mine. So you can see that I'm adding a second layer of the same colors with a textured stamp, and I'm going back in with some textured rollers. The first time I paint on this, it's wet on wet, so it's important that your colors can mix and blend together. Once it's dry, it's fun to go in with an accent color and something that's going to contrast or pop over the dried paint you've done before. This part's all about experimenting, but the next part is all about the composition and design, and this is going to make or break your painting because it is the painting. I like to do lots of research before I start, so I make a list of buildings that I remember from my trip as being important, and I research on the internet the skyline of Seattle. With our design, we're going to make a composite image, so we're not following any rules of perspective, and a good rule of thumb is to have about 10 to 15 architectural elements. And since this is a painting that is all about architecture and not a landscape, I'm aiming to fill about 75% of my composition with those buildings. I've got the Space Needle, the public market, I have the Ferris wheel, some buildings that I saw in the skyline when I was doing my research. I have a ferry and an orchid in the front because sometimes it's fun to include natural elements as well. So here's the final design, and now I'm going to transfer my composition to my textured background. I'm using a Prismacolor ebony pencil, and yes, you can erase, just not as easy. So you can kind of see my marks. And then a lot of my students like to use a white charcoal stick. That works as well. And what I'm doing is transferring my design onto my background. And my students will tell you this is the most annoying step. It's one thing to draw on a white flat piece of paper, but this is a textured background with a lot of different colors. So it can be hard to see your lines, but I promise once you have that paintbrush in your hand, don't skip this step. Your painting is all about composition, so making sure you get it right before the next step is essential. Next, pick a dominant color, and I always pick black to repaint all of those lines you drew in pencil. This is where your painting really comes to life, and yes, it does take a steady hand. It's much easier to draw a line than it is to paint one, and I recommend a small, fine brush. And this step will take the longest because this is going to be where you paint every single detail that you already drew. So pay attention to line variety, having some thick and some thin, and once you're done with that, it's time to think, do I want to add or change anything to my composition? So if you do, you can add it in pencil and then paint back over your lines. The beauty of acrylic paint too is if you paint something you don't like, just go ahead and paint over it using the same colors as your background. I wanted the Space Needle to stand taller than the rest, and so that is why I picked that section. I'm going to go in here and add a little bit more detail that I think I missed, and then I'm going to use black paint again to make sure my composition is where I want it to be before the next step, which is to choose a highlight color. I'm going to choose white because just like you can't get any darker than black, you can't get any lighter than white, and I am a contrast girl. So the purpose of highlights is to bring lightness and brightness to key areas of your painting. You want a kiss or a touch of your highlight on every single section. Sometimes it's fun to think of a light source. Is the sun shining from above, from the left-hand side? But remember, this is abstract and it's a city, so there's a billion light sources. So basically ask yourself, where do you want to draw the attention of the viewer's eye on which parts of the elements you've already painted to draw them in with the lightness and the brightness. So I'm just going through each element and I'm kind of touching up some of those black lines as well. And there's going to be a lot of touch-ups with this painting. Once I add one color, I always kind of go back and adjust the other. And I'm just going to add an area of white and make it my highlight color. Another good option is silver or gold. Those are a little bit less contrasty and they blend in more in your background if you use metallics, especially in your background. So let's speed things up here. Like I said, this would be 3 hours long if I didn't edit it to be shorter. And let's put a highlight on each section of my architecture. Now, a really fun part is the accent color. The purpose of an accent color is exactly how it sounds, is to accent a particular part of a building or part of the painting. So you can use any color you want and put it anywhere for any reason. A highlight's like brightening and lightening the painting as a whole. An accent is to draw attention to parts for whatever reason you want. So I love this dragon that I saw at the International District, and I love the curved line, and I love how it cuts into Mount Rainier. So I'm going to use red to really draw your eye there. The public market famously has red on the sign and the clock. And so I'm going to add also a little bit of red to the salmon I have out in front. Now you can add as many accent colors as you would like. I'm going to go in here with gold. That's a color that's more translucent and it brings the background to the paintings. So I'm thinking red for the areas that I really want to like bam, create contrast and emphasis, and then gold just to kind of key things down a little bit and make a connection to the background. I'm going to add some silver here as well. So this isn't my highlight. It's still part of the accent process, and you can have one highlight color and keep it really simple, but simple is something I just don't do in my work, so I'm adding as many as I feel like. And then I added more white and it made it pink, which I think fits really nice with the color scheme, so I'm going to add a little bit of pink areas as well. I would like my water down at the bottom to be a little bit more watery. So I'm going to go back to that beautiful turquoise, blue, and white to create a little bit more of a water feel at the bottom. Also to make the paint a little bit more opaque so it's really anchored down. And the orca and the ferry are just such important Seattle landmarks. Even though they're not technically architecture, it's very Seattle. Then I'm going to go back and you'll see me do a lot of touch-ups. I'm going to add some more white on the areas that I lost. So a good rule of thumb is once you do one step, go back and say, okay, when I added the gold, what did it take away from? And I always go back and retouch up my black lines. You can do this each step when the paint dries, or you can be brave and do it before the paint dries as long as you don't mind a little bit of wet on wet mixing. So I'm going to really pay attention to my black lines, and I'm going to look at this from a distance and say, okay, where do I want to create dominance, or where do I want to go back and make sure that the lines that I started with show. And again, this is an abstract painting, so I'm not thinking about light source. I'm not thinking about making the buildings look 3D. It's all about line, shape, and the impression of the city of inspiration. I'm going to keep painting black here, and you can see I even added another building. I felt like this Ferris wheel, you should be able to see through it. So I added just a building back here. And again, I looked up some images before I even started painting to make sure, even though I don't know what these buildings are, I think if you're from Seattle, you might recognize a couple of them just from the famous skyline. And I love doing the lettering on the sign. It took me several times to get it right. I didn't know if I wanted it more white, more black, or more red, but this is kind of what I came up with. And I just love the detail of the orca in the front. Even though I didn't see any on my travels there, I know it is a really cool thing if you can spot an orca in the sound. Adding a little bit of silver here so that the water has that watery feel to it. And this is the hard part of a painting. Like, when are you actually finished? And my answer to that is I feel like a painting's never finished. A good trick is to hang it up from far away and look at it and say, okay, are the things that I want to stand out standing out? How is my craftsmanship, my line work, my attention to detail? Does everything look harmonious while still having areas of emphasis like the dragon or Mount Rainier or the orca down at the bottom? And just kind of playing with each step, knowing that once you paint one color, it's usually a good idea to go back and make sure that you have that other color you maybe lost looking nice. So going back with black, white, and red is always a good option depending on what your color scheme is. I'm going to do my final touch-ups here, and I'm making the sky a little bit lighter to create that typical misty, hazy Seattle fog. Doing some last-minute touch-ups with black, making sure that everything's exactly the way I want it to be, knowing that I could paint on this every day for a million years and never feel like it's finished. So I think I'm done. I think I captured the architecture and the vibe of Seattle, at least my experience on the one time I visited. And so what city or place inspires you, and how can you capture that with architecture? Thank you so much for sticking around and making art with me. And if you're interested in more tutorials, check these out. Find my website, thatartteacher.com, for all of my resources for free for the classroom or for creating art at home.